In this short video, I'm going to give you some tips on how you can keep your children quiet in church, and not just quiet, but some of them will even want to pay attention during church, which is even a greater bonus. And later, I'll share a link especially for infants and a method that will help you keep them completely quiet and in one place in church. Number 1, have a conversation on their level. First, you have to establish with them that when they go to church, they are going to need to be quiet. Don't wait till you get to church and then try to keep telling them to be quiet there. Sit down and have an eye-to-eye conversation on their level, on their age level, and let them know that when they go into church, they're going to need to be quiet and they're going to need to whisper if they have something to say. Number 2, teach them about whispering. I've seen so many times when a parent keeps telling a child, be quiet, whisper, and the child keeps talking, but they don't know what whispering means. They don't even know how to whisper. So show them the difference between speaking and whispering. And you can do this really easily. Just take their hand and put it on your neck. And as you're speaking, let them feel those vibrations that your voice box is making and say, this is speaking. And then whisper like this. When you whisper, that vibration stops. The vocal cords do not vibrate when you're whispering. Then let them do that on their own neck and say speak and then have them whisper. Now they know the difference between speaking and whispering. Number 3, don't bring a ton of toys and snacks. Now this is a really good tip. I know you've been told or you've thought that if you bring more toys and more books, you'll have more things to occupy your children, and that will help them be quiet longer. When you bring lots of toys and books, you're setting up an expectation. And that expectation is that they will have more toys as soon as they get rid of the one they're playing with now. They just use each item quicker. Bring only 2 or 3 quiet toys. You can also bring 1 coloring book for each child that's old enough. Now, when I say old enough, I'm saying don't bring a coloring book and then it's a child that can just do this on the page. That is not someone who's old enough to do a coloring book. A coloring book would be for a child who's old enough to try to color within the lines. And then you also want to bring a pad of paper and a pencil for children who are old enough to draw pictures. That's all. 2 or 3 small, quiet toys, a coloring book and a few little crayons, and a pad of paper and a pencil. That's all. Number 4, keep items just for church. In other words, those toys and coloring books and so on, only keep those for church. This will make them more interested in those when they get them just at church. If they use them during the week, they won't be as interested in them when they get to church. There are a few suggestions in the links below that you can find some quiet church toys that would be appropriate. So I hope you'll check out those links. Number 5, get them involved. There are a few times that a child can be involved in the service as it's going on, even if they're too young to maybe understand what is going on in the sermon. Some churches, of course, have a children's minute, which is really nice where the children get to go up there and they tell a little story to the children, and I think that's awesome. But they can also be helping you throughout the service. For instance, if it's time to sing a hymn and you have to get a hymnal out, have them reach the hymnal, have them look up the number if they're old enough, let them kind of do that. That's kind of good for them in thinking of numbers and so on. Let them look that up for you. When it's time for offertory, be sure they have something that they put in the plate and they can pass it back and forth. And when it's prayer time, make sure that they know that it's time for them to bow their head and close their eyes and pray along with the person praying. It's much easier for a child to sit quietly when they have little times that they break up that sitting quietly and doing things that are involved in the service. If you get my book, How to Train Your Child to Behave, I have an entire chapter about how to use church as a tool. So you might want to check that out, and that will also be in the links in the description below. Number 6, teach them to think of others. I absolutely love this part. If your children are old enough to draw pictures, here's a way that you can get them paying attention to what's going on even in the sermon, and they can also think of others at the same time. You can have them listen to the sermon and draw on their pad of paper with their pencil anything that the speaker says. For instance, let's say he said, I went to the store one day, and they could draw the store if that's what they wanted to draw. Maybe they said there was a tree in the field, and they can draw a tree. Whatever it is that the preacher is talking about or saying, tell them to pick out something and start to draw it. It's best to show them on their piece of paper to just draw several little scenes of things that they hear in the sermon during the sermon. Then, after the service, have them hand that paper to the speaker. Now, this gets them interacting with other people. It also makes the speaker feel really good that the child was listening to what he was talking about, and it makes your child feel good that they're able to share what they were drawing with that speaker. And it keeps them paying attention. Another really good idea that a mom told me about one time, which I thought was awesome, is when your children are old enough to learn to behave and sit still, have them look around in the congregation or in the pews around them and see if there's somebody sitting by themselves, maybe an older person or a widow or somebody who's never been to church before, and have them go over and just sit by them. Of course, you need to make sure your children are well behaved at that point, but what that does is it makes the children think of others, and it makes them think of how to be welcoming to others. And that makes people feel really good, especially an older woman who maybe has lost her husband and it feels alone when she's in church, and your child is going to be a ministry to her. So that is a good way for your children to be involved in church, and also they'll want to sit quietly when they're with somebody else. Of course, make sure they're in eye shot of you so you can pay attention to what's going on. Number 7, stay on top of behavior. If your child begins to fuss or whine or disrupt, take them out of the service, but don't make it a pleasant experience. I really want to stress this point. I have seen so many parents take their children out because they start to cry or fuss or whatever, and they take them out of the service, and then they do things like take them outside and let them walk around, or they start to play with toys with them, or whatever. And what that does is it makes the child gives the child more incentive to want to cry and fuss in church, because then they get to go out and do something they enjoy. Remember, whatever your response is to a child's behavior becomes an expectation and then a habit. If when they fuss and cry and whine in church, you take them out, you give them that expectation that that's what's going to happen if they cry and whine. So what are they going to do? They're going to cry and whine, of course. And then that becomes a habit. And this happens, and so many parents wonder, why does my child always cry and fuss in church? Well, what are you doing? If you're taking them out and making it a pleasant experience, that's why they're doing it. So don't make them expect that if they're taken out of the service, that's going to be a pleasant moment. If they're starting to whine or throw a fit or something like that, apply CTM. Now, if you've just started the CTM method and they haven't quite got it all the way yet, and it might take a few minutes, then you want to take them out and apply CTM. But if you have been applying CTM before, they'll probably know. You'll put your hand up and they'll stop the whining and crying right away. If you don't know what CTM is, I'll put a link up above that will get you there to a video that'll explain exactly what that is, and also in the description below. Now, if they aren't screaming or throwing a fit, but they're doing something else that's inappropriate in the service, take them out of the service, look at them straight in the eye with your hands on both arms and straight in their face, and explain what they're doing wrong. Tell them that's unacceptable, and that now you're going to walk back into the service and sit down, and you expect them to behave differently. Then walk right back into the service and sit right in the spot where you were before. There should be no pleasantries when they have to leave the service because of misbehavior. Teach blanket time. Now, this is for infants and toddlers. Blanket time works so well, and it keeps your toddlers and your infants quiet and in one place without struggling. I use the blanket method, and I could go to church, I could just lay down a blanket, my children would sit on the blanket, and they would be quiet, and I could listen to the service, and they didn't go around crawling or whatever. It was wonderful. To learn about that method in detail, just click on the card on the screen now. Parents, if you're struggling, something needs to change, and you can do this. Thanks for watching, and don't forget to subscribe. I'll see you here next week.